The gun has returned, along with this hat, which I wish I had some sort of dapper suit that would fit this thing, but you know what, I'm wearing it anyways. So, all for the game. I liked it okay. Yeah, that's my one sentence summary of my thoughts. Like, I liked it okay, but obviously you're all here for more than that. I would be a pretty bad critic if that's all I said.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
All for the Game are a trilogy of books, and they're hard to classify. It goes The Foxhole Court, The Raven King, and The King's Men. And while the titles do sound kind of like they're from fantasy novels, the books are not fantasy novels at all. I guess maybe they're romance, but the romance doesn't really come into play until halfway through the final book, so I wouldn't call them that. And they're not mystery, they're not science fiction, they're not horror, they're not thrillers, so I don't really know how to classify them, but I did kind of like that. The story is about a guy named Neil, who we find out his real name is Nathaniel, who is on the run from the Mafia. While he's on the run, he decides to enroll at Palmetto University, which is not a real school, and he plays on one of their sports teams, and the team is called the Foxes, which is where, the Foxhole Court comes from. And while he's doing this, he's plastering his face all over the country while he's on the run from the Mafia. This obviously doesn't go that well, and then mayhem ensues. Like, that's the simplest way I can think to explain this. These books have a decent-sized fan base, and it's easy to see why. Like, they're ridiculous, and they're dumb. Let's be clear about that right up front. These books are ridiculous and dumb, but they do have heart to them. And honestly, I liked the ridiculous levels that the story reaches, because the author seems self-aware about how dumb it is, and she's just having fun with it. My main problem with All for the Game as a whole is that it doesn't go far enough. It needed to be a little bit stupider, and it needed to be a little bit more ridiculous. As things stand right now, I got some hearty chuckles out of these books. If they had gone all the way with some of these ideas that they bring up, I would have laughed my ass off and had a grand old time. Like, I'd be giving a much more positive review. I'd be saying, yes, check out The Foxhole Court, that book is hilarious. As it is, like, it's funny at a few points, but it never goes far enough to really be hilarious. And there are some bits in these books that are actual serious dramatic moments and serious dramatic scenes and just aspects to the story that are meant to be taken seriously, and those are lacking, let's say. Like, I'll get into more detail later, but they are just lacking a bit. And I think if this book, or book series I should say, had just leaned a bit more into being zany and crazy, it would have been a lot better overall. Now, I'm unsure how to summarize the plot exactly. Just to be advised that from this point forward, there will be spoilers. Just be advised.
So this fun game is called Pincushion Man.
So like I said, the protagonist of these books is a guy named Neil, and he's on the run from the Mafia. He's about 19 years old, and he joins a sports team at Palmetto State University. Now, the sport he plays is called Xe. I'll get into that more later. It's not a real sport, though. So, throughout the books, he practices a bunch, and he plays games, and he tries to keep his identity a secret. He learns some harsh truths about his new teammates, because they all have their own dark pasts and their own internal struggles. And then partway through book 2, Neil actually gets discovered by his old organized crime life. Again, he's plastering his face on the news and stuff, what like reporters are reporting on the games and saying like, hey, check out this star athlete who's playing Xe really good. Like, people are going to notice him, obviously. But he gets found by his old Mafia people, and he makes a deal with them so that he's not immediately murdered, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, they really wanted him dead, but they give him several months so that he can wrap up unfinished business. It's dumb and doesn't actually make sense. He sees that his life will end soon, and he stops caring about things, and he's kind of surly. But he's also good at the sports things, and his coach actually tells him that he wants him to become team captain next year. And just as he's starting to think that maybe he wants to live, he gets kidnapped and brought to his father in Baltimore. Now, his father is the one who's been after him this whole time. Now, his father is about to kill him, but then other gangsters come in and there's a gunfight and his father is killed because there's some sort of mafia power struggle here. It's never really expanded on. It's basically just, yeah, Neil's uncle killed his dad and took over the organization. But Neil's dad was not the head honcho. He was actually subordinate to the Japanese Yakuza, who are well known for being very active in Baltimore, Maryland. I mean, just ask anyone from that area. You can't walk 2 steps without running into Yakuza. The point is that Neil is still in danger and he might still be killed, but he manages to meet up with the Yakuza boss and he makes a deal with him where basically he's gonna try and go pro as an XC player within the next couple of years when he graduates, and he just says that for the entirety of his career he'll give them most of the money he makes. So they agree to that, but then him and his team play in the finals against their heated rivals, and they play really, really good, so the Yakuza just decides they don't even want his money anymore. They just let him live, and they leave him alone. And that's it. That's the end. As of the time of this recording, it has been almost a month since I finished these books, and for various reasons it took me months to get through them. So normally that would make a video like this more difficult. You know, I would struggle to remember small details, and the emotions that I felt while reading, both good and bad, would start to fade after a little bit. But in this case, I think that actually works to my advantage, because All for the Game is stupid, and pointing out all the weird stuff and all the plot holes and everything, well, that's kind of missing the point. Like, that would be like making fun of Riverdale for going off the rails. Like, that's the point. It's a comedy. You're supposed to laugh at it. The writers weren't being serious when they had Betty become an FBI agent and then fight a bunch of mechanical ant people. Like, they knew that was stupid. They weren't trying to make dramatic high art when they had 2 serial killers escape from prison and then take Betty's family hostage and have a gay wedding in front of the Christmas tree. Like, they were trying to make a joke. I did not make any of that up, by the way. Both of those things really do happen in Riverdale.
And by the power vested in me by the Universal Life Church, I now pronounce you husband and husband.
I love that show, but like that's the point though, is that show is stupid, but you're supposed to think it's stupid. It's a comedy. You're not supposed to take that part of it seriously. The point is, because it took me so long to get through All Through the Game, I had time to think it over, and I think I mellowed out on it a little bit, honestly, because like some of the dumb stuff I was thinking like was funny, but after thinking it over a little more, I think it's funnier. I still don't think it's as funny as it could be, but I think it's funnier than when I first finished. One thing I liked here is that even if the author isn't taking all of this too seriously, the characters are at least taking it seriously, because too often comedic stuff will spend a lot of time reassuring the audience that they're in on the joke, and it usually just comes across as desperate. It comes across as the creators going, no, come on, I know this is stupid. I'm trying to be a funny. I'm trying to do a funny. Please don't think I'm cringe, internet. And it is understandable why they would act that way. I think a lot of them are afraid of being treated the way Riverdale gets treated, because, you know, people who have never watched it or have barely watched it will scoff when you bring it up and say it's dumb because they don't realize it's a joke. Like, yeah, we know it's dumb. You're supposed to laugh at it. And those people do that because they can't read between the lines, and unfortunately there's a lot of people like that, so now everyone wants to like wink at the camera. That's why we have dialogue where people go like, oh, well that just happened. But All for the Game doesn't do that. It avoids that trap, thankfully. Like, the characters treat all the dumb stuff very seriously. There's no winking at the camera, and that makes it even funnier. These people really do treat college sports like it's a life and death scenario, and it's amazing. Like, the reason that Neil and his mom actually fled from his dad, because he's been on the run for 8 years at the start of the story, so he was just a kid when his mom took him and fled. And the reason they fled was that he was supposed to try out for a sports team, and if he failed that tryout, the Yakuza were going to kill him. Why? And Neil didn't know about this, but his mom didn't want to take the risk, so she took him and ran. And his mom never actually told him that that's why she took him and ran. Like, normally I would take some time to go to how that was a dumb decision on her part, and it was also a very selfish decision on her part. Like, obviously she wanted to protect her son, but she did so by taking him away from his entire life and forcing him into a situation which is even more dangerous. Like, being on the run from the Mafia is not a great situation to be in. Like, she didn't give him any choice in the direction that his life took. So she's simultaneously being a good parent and being a very, very shitty one. Like, there's room to examine and explore some of those ideas in a review like this, but again, these books are supposed to be stupid, so I'm just gonna leave it. The problem is that some of this stuff just isn't stupid enough. You know, it needed to be even dumber. It needed to be even crazier and more over the top. Like, sure, deadly sports tryouts are amusing, but if you want to take it from being amusing to being truly funny, you have to take it a step further. What if the Yakuza was only able to get away with this sort of thing because they used hypnosis to take over the entire city of Baltimore? Like, they needed test subjects to make more powerful hypnosis so that they could take over the federal government. Like, that's fucking ridiculous. And I came up with it in about 10 seconds, but it would be really funny to read. Or like how the main rival to the Palmetto State Foxes are another college team. They're from Edgar Allan University, and they're called the Ravens. Like, get it? It's a reference to The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. And that reference is worth a chuckle, but they could have gone a lot farther with it. Like, what if the Edgar Allan Ravens were also a cult and they worshipped some sort of raven god? Like, again, that's stupid, but it would be funny if I read it. And you might be watching this thinking, well, James, are you basically saying that these books should have become Riverdale? And yeah, like, they clearly want to be something similar to Riverdale, and they're already 3/4 of the way there. Like, they have all of the weird teen melodrama that's combined with the absolutely bonkers world building and the nutty events that occur alongside this teen melodrama. Like, they're pretty close to being Riverdale. They just don't go far enough to reach the heights that, well, these books could reach. You know, like, if they just went a little farther, they'd be better. Like, there were a dozen other bits in this series, like either bits of world building or moments that happen or character interactions or something. There's a dozen of them that were kind of like the Deadly Tryouts, and they just didn't quite make it to where they were going. So it was funny, but it wasn't that funny. The characters in these books have real struggles and relationships, and those struggles and relationships are mostly pretty realistic. Like, there's one guy in these books who is gay, and he has homophobic parents, and that's actually handled pretty well. And it doesn't go over the top, it's not treated as a joke, and we see how that has affected him over the years. And that actually applies for most of the character drama here. Like, most of it is competently written. The problem is that when you contrast it with the ludicrous events and the world building here, it just feels off. Like, I want to get into these smaller conflicts because, again, they're not badly written, but I keep thinking about the Japanese Mafia sports fans who took over Baltimore, and then that just kind of takes me out of it.
What the hell is that?
So to put it in short, All for the Game works okay as an over-the-top comedy, but it does fail as a serious drama, because all the over-the-top comedy stuff is distracting from the serious drama stuff, even if the serious drama stuff isn't done that poorly. And really, that's why I found these books to just be fine. You know, there's parts that are very good and fun, there's parts that are boring and dull, and overall it's fine. It's fine, you know? And while I don't really want to go into all of the little dumb things in these books, I'm already here, so I may as well. The most obvious problem. Neil is hiding from the Mafia, and then he becomes a college sports star, where he shows up on the news and stuff. Do I need to explain why this is a bad idea? Again, his face is everywhere, even if he's using a pseudonym, which he does, like he goes by Neil, but his real name is Nathaniel. Like, it would be really easy to find him. And to these books' credit, yeah, they do find him. It's not like he stays hidden the whole time, but when they find him, number one, it takes a lot longer than you would expect it to, and number two, just like, why? Why would you do that, Neil? That doesn't make sense. Hiding in plain sight is a strategy that some criminals have used. Like, if you've ever seen the movie Casino, Robert De Niro's character, whose name is Ace, does get in trouble with his bosses in the Mafia, so he starts hosting a TV show. Because he knows that if he's hosting a TV show, then a lot of people are watching him and paying attention to him, so if he gets killed, then the people who kill him will bring a lot of unwanted attention on themselves. That movie's fictional, though, so if you want a real-life example of this sort of thing, just look at Henry Hill. He was a real guy, and his life story was turned into the movie Goodfellas. Very good movie, by the way. Henry Hill was formerly a Mafia associate, and then he turned state's witness, and he actually went into the witness protection program, but he kept selling drugs while he was there, so he got kicked out, which I think he's the only person to ever be kicked out of witness protection, actually. But after that, that's when he published a book, and he started doing interviews about his time in the Mafia in order to draw attention to himself so that he wouldn't be murdered. Because again, he testified against his old associates. Like, if they got their hands on him, he knew he was dead, so he just said, okay, I'm going to draw a bunch of attention to myself. The difference between Neil and Henry Hill is that Henry Hill was very open about who he was. Like, he was famous for being a former Mafia associate. He didn't use a fake name. He sought refuge in the limelight. Neil is trying to be known publicly and trying to hide his identity at the same time, and as a result, he does both very, very poorly. And even if that's intentional on the author's part, it was still irritating to read. This does lead me to how the book handles Mafia and organized crime stuff, and honestly, I think some of the ways in which this is handled are great. Okay, it's a bit silly, but it is still handled well, because there's never any doubt here that all of the organized crime people are bad people. Like, they are murderers and thieves. They have very few redeeming qualities. Some of them act a little over the top, and they almost come across as cartoon characters, but they're still bad people, and the books never make any excuses for them. There's no romanticization where they describe them as being honorable or tough or anything else. They're awful human beings. Like, even Neil's father, Nathan, is evil. You know, he's nicknamed the Butcher because he kills so many people in such brutal ways, and from the beginning, Neil hates his father. There's no ambiguity here. Like, he doesn't stop and think about pleasant childhood memories or try to redeem his father and say, like, no, you can stop, Dad. You don't have to be this person anymore. Like, no, he just hates him, and because he knows his dad is a monster. And then near the end, he gets his comeuppance. And honestly, considering how many shitty romance novels try to make the Mafia out to be hot, it's just nice to see someone be honest about these scumbags and what they're like. You know, Brutal Prince and other books like it don't even show mafiosos doing mafia shit. They're just businessmen, but kind of edgy. Like, they leave out them selling drugs to children or smuggling weapons to people who really shouldn't have weapons. They leave out all the murders and the extortion. They're just as edgy businessmen. So the sport that Neil and his friends play is called Exy. And like I said, that's not a real sport. It's described as being kind of like lacrosse, where you have like the racket and you carry a ball in it and try to knock it into a goal. But it's played indoors, and it's described as being a bit more violent than lacrosse, and that's all I can say about it. Yeah, the books give surprisingly little information about how the game works. Like, what sort of strategies do they employ? What does a match of Exy even look like? We get not that much detail. And I understand that Exy is just a backdrop for everything else, and if it was just a backdrop for everything else and it took up very little time, I wouldn't think too much about it, but it still takes up quite a lot of time. And if it takes up a lot of time, you need to explain it. During all the game sequences, I had to use a lot of imagination to fill in the gaps. And reminder, the climax of the entire trilogy is an Exy game. Like, you would think that the climax would be, you know, the gunfight where Neil's dad is killed and he's finally freed, but the book goes on for quite a while after that. That was only like 2/3 of the way through the final book was that, and the real climax was their final Exy game against the Ravens. If the shootout was meant as the climax, then this book has really bad structure. It's just a mess. The point is, the climax, because it was a game I didn't really understand, was really just white noise for me. And that's a shame, because XE could be a very unique and interesting sport. We could all learn about it and try to figure out at how the heroes could improve upon it, like both as individuals and as a team. But there's just not enough there, and it's hard to care about a game that I don't understand. So before the books begin, Neil is on the run with his mom, and she actually dies about a year before the books start, because goons catch up with them, and they escape, but in the scuffle she is shot, and then later she dies of her wounds, and Neil actually burns her body in their car. Why? Why wouldn't you just... You need to get rid of her body, why don't you just burn it somewhere else? Because, you know, burning it in the car is going to destroy the car. That's your only means of transportation. Don't you need that? Hello? Also, you cannot cremate a human body that easily. Like, the human body is mostly water. It's hard to burn. Crematoriums have specialized ovens for this sort of thing. And also, by not reporting this and disposing of her body yourself, you are committing multiple felonies, Neil. Like, at this point, just go to the FBI, man. You're out of options. Just go to the FBI and hope they can protect you. Like, this whole sequence is supposed to be dramatic, but it's just too weird and nonsensical, and it just did not work at all for me. And this is pretty early in the first book where we learn this, so at this point I was more in the vein of thinking like, okay, the books are trying to be taken seriously, but they're just doing dumb bullshit like this, so I was thinking more negatively about it, and as it went on I realized, okay, this is supposed to be kind of stupid, but this scene continues to be stupid in a bad way, let's say. This book series has the same problem that a lot of books have, and a lot of anime and manga have this problem as well. In fact, it's really, really noticeable in anime and manga, which is that the characters are very young, but they're treated like they're a lot older than they really are. You know, Neil's 19, but he has the life experiences of someone who's 10 to 15 years older. You know, he's a star athlete who fell from grace and now is trying to work his way back up. And he grew up in the Mafia. And he's been on the run for 8 years. And he's had a bunch of failed relationships. Like, he just doesn't really feel like he's 19, and neither do some of his teammates. Like, years ago I tried to read a book called Red Knight, which was not very good, and the protagonist in that book was, like, an experienced mercenary captain who had fought 100 battles and was feared throughout the land, and he was only 20 years old. And I'm like, okay, if you want to show him being young, I can forgive it if he's like 26 or 27, but like 20 years old was just way too much for the number of accomplishments he'd had. Or someone like Selena from Throne of Glass. You know, she's the world's most experienced and deadly assassin with all the greatest combat skills, and she can take on 20 men without magic or planning, and she's like 19 years old. You know, like there's a line you don't want to cross with this sort of thing, right? You want to make their exploits seem more impressive by making them young, then sure, go for it. But if they're too young and their exploits are too much to believe for someone that age, it pulls the audience out of the story. Like, one way of looking at it is saying that you wrote a level 20 backstory for a level 1 character. That's one thing I actually like about a lot of sci-fi and fantasy that's aimed at adults, you know, because they often feature adult characters in their 30s and 40s and beyond. They've had long lives already, so their competence and their wisdom make sense. You know, it doesn't feel like the author is reaching down and giving them information that they shouldn't have. They know how to do stuff because they've had time to learn. And when you don't do that, it just looks ridiculous. Imagine if the Stormlight Archive was rewritten and they made Dalinar Kholin 21 years old. You know, everything else is basically the same. He still had his reputation from decades of being a brutal warlord. He still has his struggles with alcoholism and his strained relationship with his kids. They just made everyone younger. Like, how silly would that come across? That's a rhetorical question. Really, really silly, and not in a fun way. But that's how a lot of books are written now, particularly stuff that's written and aimed at teenagers, or aimed at adults who still think they're teenagers. Sometimes the opposite also happens, though. Like, we have stuff like Silver Elite and Fourth Wing, both of which are terrible books. The leads are 20 years old in each of those books, so that the authors can write them having hardcore sex, but then they act like they're in middle school. You know, like, because the protagonists of both of those books are imbeciles in a way that would be acceptable if they were 12. And the stories / conflicts that they're involved in would also make more sense and be more acceptable if they were 12, but they're adults, so their stupidity and naivete are really annoying. The fetishization of every character being young, especially protagonists, is getting worse all the time. Like, especially in the past, like, 3 or 4 years, it seems to be getting much, much worse. Because, look, some stories work with young protagonists, and some don't. Some stories work with adult protagonists, and some don't. And you need to understand which is which if you're going to write.
Everybody got that?
All for the Game isn't awful in that regard, but it is still a problem that I noticed, and I wanted to mention it. Maybe one of these days I'll do an entire video just on that. I don't know. So Neil is bisexual. Remember, I mentioned that romance doesn't really become a thing until halfway through the final book. Well, Neil and one of his teammates become a couple, and it's a dude, which is not a problem at all. I just am not super big on how they handled it, because yeah, he had some sexual tension with that dude ahead of time, and they end the series as a couple. Great. I think there was some chemistry there. It wasn't great chemistry, but there was some there. But I don't think it was ever mentioned or even implied before that point that Neil was attracted to men. Like, it's mentioned a bunch of failed relationships that he's had in the past, sure, but those were all with women. Those were all with girls that he had. So him suddenly revealing, like, oh yeah, I've been attracted to men this whole time, it feels like a twist that was there purely to surprise the audience, rather than a twist that actually makes sense and was built up to. And if somebody reads this wanting to read a gay romance, then they're probably going to be disappointed because, again, it doesn't come in until halfway through the final book, and even then it doesn't get that much focus. So, I don't know, I wouldn't call this whole bit like a problem with the book necessarily, but there's some missed potential here. There's a missed opportunity to, you know, have a well-written relationship. Because if you want to have romance in your story, then put romance in your story, okay? Have it be built up to, have us see the couple fall in love, and then let us see them just be a couple for a while. Like, if you're just going to throw it in here almost like an afterthought, then it's hard to care. So, what is the verdict of All for the Game? Well, the books needed to be stupider. They needed to go balls to the wall nuts with some of this, especially with the Mafia stuff. And they also needed to explain Exy more. Like, hell, they could explain Exy more and use that as a way to go balls to the wall nuts. Like, maybe the walls of the court have knives on them or something, so if someone tackles you, you might get stabbed. Like, obviously, that's not realistic. They're not gonna have that in a real college sport in the real world, but, like, there's already a lot of dumb, unrealistic shit in here. You just go nuts with it. I did not hate these books. I thought they were fine. There were parts that were very, very amusing, but they just didn't quite work for me. That said, I see how they could be a guilty pleasure for other people, so if you're looking for something like that, I guess you can check them out, but if you finish the first book and the first book doesn't quite work for you, then the sequels really don't get better. So just keep that in mind. Speaking of guilty pleasures, are you subscribed to my channel? Have you checked out my merchandise store? Did you know I'm on Cameo now? And you can, you know, get a shout out from me over there? If you didn't know that, you should go check all of that out. Check the description below this video. Goodbye. Hello to everyone who watched this entire video and is continuing to watch the end credits. All these names here, these are the names of my patrons. If you want to get your name here, you can go over to patreon.com/JamesTullis and start supporting me. You know, you get things like early access to videos, and it starts at only $1 a month. That's pretty great. My $10 and up patrons are 3 Cat Day, Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin, Brother Santodes, Carolina Clay, Chris Goldap, Lexi DeLorme, Lord Tiebreaker, Michael and Katie Hake, Mr. A5013, Proscriptions of Dwojang, PsychXS, Toa Michael, Vevictus, and Wesley. Without these people, I could not do what I do, so I just thank you, all of you, so much from the bottom of my heart. You can also support me via YouTube channel memberships. You'll still get early access to videos, but your name won't be on here. Sorry, YouTube doesn't do a great job of telling me who is a member and where to find them. You can also buy a shout out from me over on Cameo if you feel like it. If that's not up your alley, I got merchandise at my Fourth Wall store. I got stuff like this lovely t-shirt. I've also got some other stuff over there if you want to check it out. But if you don't feel like doing any of that, then simply liking the video, commenting on it, subscribing to my channel, and just continuing to watch, that's more than enough. That does mean the world to me. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.